Halito Chimachukma Yakoki. Greetings, I am Nura Sunlight.
Kalito Chambachupa, greetings. I am Victor Burning Fire.
And thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be going over nation states. A good friend of ours had mentioned that there's indigenous tribes and they're supposed to be sovereign. But today we're going to be exposing the state, discussing some things, and this is just at the spur of the moment. Exposing the state, nation state, in relation to indigenous nations. They're not the same thing. So what I'm going to do is just read and we'll just kind of discuss it, going over my notes and everything. But before we get started, I just want everybody to remember that state is not the land. A nation state is not the land. It's fiction, it's a political fiction. Okay, now it says here that in my notes, as indigenous nations, we existed long before states originated. And the state system did not simply spring up after 1648. It took centuries of deepening trade networks, bureaucracy, empire building, and competition between political powers to form the states that we know today. All right, now with that said, a good friend of ours said that there was a indigenous tribe in the northern parts of North America that's supposed to be sovereign. But see, they were recognized by the state, which is the United States Corporation. So if they're recognized by the state, they are still under the state. There's a difference between a state and a nation, and I'm going to read this. Like I said, the state is actually political. It's not the land itself. And you had mentioned something as far as the state of mind. You had given me an example of the state of mind. Remember?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Coming from the colonizers, they came over here and colonized us as Aboriginal indigenous people. What really actually happened was that they were forcing them to come into a state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
What that state of mind really actually means is that they were changing their mindset from being natural living, breathing beings to a state to where they wanted them to be, which is a state of mind.
And which is just that illusion that they are legitimate, and they're not. It's all a part of the assimilation process. Now, as an example, I know we were taught this a while ago, but I didn't really catch this until recently. Where were you born? I was born from my mother's womb. But the state will tell you you were born in the state of, and in whatever state they have, and that's the state of mind that you're in. It's not the physical land itself. It's just a political fiction by name only. Now, I'm going to read the 4 characteristics where a state can be formed according to their colonial system. According to the 1933 Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States, in order to be recognized as a state under international law, a state must have the following 4 characteristics. 1, a permanent population. 2, a defined territory. 3, a government. 4, the capacity to enter into relations with other states. See, only states can recognize other states. People that run these things, they recognize other states. They recognize other fictions. So when someone says that indigenous nation is sovereign under this state, they're not. Anytime you're recognized by these fictional entities and the people that operate them, you're not sovereign. So exposing the state. To begin, states and nations are two entirely different things. There are approximately 200 recognized states within the world system today, and yet there are more than 5,000 indigenous nations. It's probably more. Well, they just said more than. These nations are often trapped within states, within the state borders, these artificial or invisible boundary lines. States are often referred to as nation states, creating the illusion that the state is one single group of people. However, since its origins in 1648 by the Treaty of Westphalia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, the state has always been violent and colonial. By definition, a state is a political/legal creation of borders and a centralized political system that imposes its authority through violence on pre-existing indigenous nations and people. So, I mean, that tells you right there, this came with colonialism. So to try to try to define or be self-defined, you're being defined according to their definition. You're not really self-defining. And to say that you're sovereign and you're within one of these nation states or you within one of these colonial states, you're never sovereign. You gotta stop holding on to their concepts like they're our own. We gotta decolonize our minds to do that.
Well, let's give an example. And we've been through these experiences where they wanted to call you a sovereign citizen.
Oh yes. You cannot be
There's
sovereign.
a big difference here.
Yes.
The difference is that they're calling you a citizen, which means that you have just come under the state of what they put on you. Now, if you were sovereign, that's something totally different.
Oh, yeah. And even that word sovereignty, that's not a part of our indigenous culture, that language itself. When looking more closely in the 1933 Global Standards for Statehood, it becomes clear that most states apply these criteria arbitrarily, just like at the flip of a hat or whatever, just like they do nowadays. They pick and choose who they're going to arrest and lock up, kill, or whatever they want to do when it comes to the Aboriginal indigenous people, because they want to maintain an illusion of legitimacy here on our land. For example, most First Nations or Aboriginal indigenous people to this land in British Columbia have never given up title to our homelands and are closer to meeting the above criteria than the government of that colony called Canada. But the key to these criteria is recognition. If you are recognized as a state by other powerful states, so remember fictions, then your authority is unquestioned. Unfortunately, for some 370 million indigenous peoples trapped within 70 states around the world, these four arbitrary requirements for statehood often come at an expense of their relationships to the land, our communities, clans, societies, tribes, etc., traditional forms of government. It's like you take on their form of government, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Aboriginal indigenous people of this land. And that's of any Aboriginal and indigenous people, like of Africa, Australia, whatever. They all have been colonized and they've taken on that form of government. That's where you see all their white wigs and all that kind of artificial stuff. Okay, so you compromise and you give up your relationship to your clans, your tribes, and all that, and your own traditional forms of government, and forms of political diplomacy, the way that we settle disputes and things like that. We have a completely different way. It's not by force of arms, you know. These criteria for state recognition are symptoms of an immature society, a society that prioritizes the accumulation of information and material resources over live values such as wisdom and respect. Look around. They have absolutely no respect for human life. They have these people called governors. With the stroke of a pen, they decide who's gonna live and who's gonna die. You have these people in this false, fake, so-called Supreme Court. That means the superior, like a God court, is going to determine what they call abortion, who's gonna live and who's gonna die. You know, we don't have, as far as Aboriginal Indigenous people, that's totally against our culture. We don't have a violent culture the way that they want to portray us to be. States are thought to have sovereign powers. Wrong. Which means that there is no higher authority than states in the world today. But this is political and a legal fiction. Remember, fiction is not real.
Fiction is not real.
It's not real. Therefore, from an indigenous perspective, sovereignty is the state's claim to have the exclusive authority to forcefully intervene in all activities within its borders, in its artificial boundary lines. So, state of Texas, they got this line. State of Florida, state of whatever, you know. I mean, they're and not even that. I mean, they're fictions, yes, but they're colonies. What's the etymology? The origin, meaning of words and their history. Okay, they came over here as the 13 original colonies. They have not changed. They've just expanded. Now there's like 50, I guess. I don't even keep track of that, but it's like 50 colonies now. They are what they were born as. Just like we're born as Aboriginal, Indigenous, sentient beings. We got souls. We're born in this fleshly body. When we get mature, we're not gonna turn into a frog. We're gonna be what we were when we were born, and always be that. Okay, so I was reading. Therefore, from the indigenous perspective, sovereignty is the state's claim to have an exclusive authority to forcefully intervene in all activities within its borders whenever necessary. It practices violence on peoples residing within its legally recognized borders as they challenge the legitimacy of the state's authority. So anytime we challenge their authority, which they really don't have, the only authority they have is what we give them, and we keep holding on to their documents and everything, holding on to their constitutions, trust treaties, and all these things that they brought with them, claiming that they're ours, which keeps them dominant over us and in occupation of our land. Based on the above definition and given the colonial history of states, sovereignty is clearly an inappropriate term to describe the goals and aspirations of indigenous nations. In contrast to states, look at this is the opposite now. Indigenous nations are communities of peoples with living, breathing, sentient beings that from born for untold centuries, eons, on this part of Mother Earth, meaning indigenous, who identify themselves based on oral and written histories as descendants of the original, that's Aboriginal, inhabitants of their ancestral homelands, who are land, water-based cultures disrupted by colonial invasions. This land, water-based cultures, is complete opposite of what we see today. Pollution, it was pristine over here before they came over here. Now, Their culture is a violent culture. It's a greedy, materialistic culture. We didn't do that. We have to regain our forgotten cultures, which is our language, the way that we did things, the way that we communicate man and woman, getting back to the basic natural elements of just living naturally. Go ahead.
Abundance is a natural law of the universe. I say that a lot
right.
because it really actually is. But what you just explained is that there are just a few that want to control all the resources.
Mm-hmm.
So if naturally creation have given the Aboriginal people a way to make a living for themselves, they want to they want to take that away from you so they can control it. Mm-hmm. And that's what you have going all over. A few wants to rule the world by taking in all the natural resources. So the Aboriginal Indigenous people all over the world go through all of this and they feel that they don't have anything, but that's only because a few of them are trying to take it away from them.
So we have to get away from that. We have to stop mimicking our oppressors. That's exactly what we're doing when we call ourselves, well, we're going to be sovereign, we're going to start a nation state. No, that's the colonial way.
Yes.
That's colonialism. We have to decolonize. That means get completely away from their way of doing things. We have to change our mindset, resurrect our own ways of doing things, the way our ancestors.
But this is natural coming from creation. You can't build a house on sinking sand. Sand is not the substance to build something strong. That's what the saying really actually means. In other words, you have to build a house and build your roots and put your roots in the ground to where it will stand and withstand all the weather that comes against it. That's the natural process of life. So this information that we're giving to the Aboriginal Indigenous people, we're putting in roots deep so you can have knowledge of self, that you can know who you are.
Right, and the reason why we keep going through the same thing over and over again, trying all kinds of things to try to get out of this oppressive state, this illusion, this Maya, it's because we keep going back. Our mindset is still stuck in colonialism. Our minds are still colonized. And if we keep holding on to that colonial apron, we'll never be free. And I don't even want to use their word sovereignty. They made that mess up. We didn't have that. I mean, who are they to give people rights? This is not about our rights. This is about our responsibility to self-define us on ourselves and on our own terms, not what they said like at the United Nations. Oh, those are a bunch of nation states. Those are a bunch of political fictions. We have to do this. Even if we do these in small groups and put the pressure on, the colonizers have to leave our lands. They're not going to do that as long as you're going to them.
You brought up something really important about the Bureau
of Indian Affairs.
In other words, if you go under this Bureau,
you're up under that nation state.
Indian Affairs, where you just consented and going underneath what they want you to be.
Well, not what they want you to be. They're defining you.
Yes, it's a good example.
They're defining you according to their colonial system, their invasive system. Okay, so our cultures are water-based, land-based. That land-based, that's where Indigenous comes from. We're tied to that. That's the core of being Indigenous is the land. So why are you going to go and do some old fictional stuff that doesn't mean anything? Okay, water-based, land-based. It is this place-based existence along with an awareness of being in struggle against foreign states' seeking to strip us of our homelands. That fundamentally distinguishes indigenous nations from other peoples of the world. See, these are foreigners up in here. We've been through this over and over again. We're not Indians, we're not Negroes, blacks, we're not colors, we're not African Americans. Now, they give us all these names, all these fictional labels. But people seem to not realize, man, you just came over here a couple hundred years ago. Where you come from? You see these Alban Europeans? Go back to Africa. We're not from Africa. This is our homeland. Your homeland is over in Europe and Africa somewhere. They have to leave. But the only way that's going to happen is if we stop keeping them here. When discussing indigenous nations, resistance to states, the words self-determination are often used. According to geographer Bernard, I can't pronounce his name. I can't pronounce that, but he says, quote, because they are occupied parts of states, nations will not be given self-determination. Self-determination is something that is taken, not given. True. It is achieved by economic, political, and military force, not by the goodwill of state governments or fictional governments outside of ourselves. By denying indigenous self-determination, states are exposed for their inherent violence against indigenous nations. This shows how acts of state building are also actions of indigenous nation destroying. So if a state is legally recognized, if a state is a legally recognized entity and a nation is a community of self-identifying peoples, what is a nation state? That's a good question. As mentioned earlier, the term nation state assumes that the nation and state are the same thing, and it's not. According to this logic, within the state of, or the state of mind of, there's a Canada, there should be only one nation residing within its borders. No, there's many, many, many indigenous nations within these artificial boundary lines, what they call the colony of Canada and North America. I think down South America, what they're calling South America, what they're calling North America. There's a lot of indigenous nations, peoples, but they still have these artificial boundary lines created by these colonial nation states that keep the people in the state of mind that is real, and it's not real. This is clearly not the case, as there are over 600 indigenous nations within Canada. Since more than 95% of all states have more than one nation within their borders, it is safe to say that the concept of the nation state is a myth. That's all it is. It's not real. There are myths created by the state in order to promote its legitimacy. And they keep the people in this state of mind to think this, unreal. They think this unreal, this fictional entity, these fictional entities is for real, and it's not real. We have to get out of that. We have to decolonize our minds.
You brought up something very important, and you used the word mind. You also read that they put you in a state of mind, controlling your mind to where you won't have any knowledge of self.
Right.
And having knowledge of self is very, very important. This is why we are stressing that you are Aboriginal and indigenous to these lands.
This land.
But if they take that out of your mind and tell you are a Moor, Black, Negro, colored,
Indian,
African American, Indian, instead of being a natural living, breathing being liberated within your mind,
they can't do that.
if they get part of your mind and control of your mind, they will try to control you in the way that they want you to be.
Yeah, they won't try to, they will.
So who do you belong to?
This
Do
is
you
what
belong
they're doing.
to yourself and your family, or do you belong to them? That's what it comes down to. That's what it all boils down to, is getting control over you.
Look. Terminology has a lot to do with it. Their legalese, their jargon. Okay, it's going to go into terminology now.
Okay.
Terminology is used to justify state actions, but these terms hide larger truths. I have compiled some of these commonly used terms in this table. I got a table right here below in order to uncover this truth, the meanings. The listed terms below, which are still commonly used by states, demonstrate that colonialism is an ongoing process. The simplest test I use to decode state peak is, how do these terms correspond to words in our own indigenous languages? For the most part, terms like reconciliation and economic development do not exist in indigenous languages, in our tongues. That makes them alien terms. That's what I was saying. These words, they're alien to us. Rooted in settler values, rooted in the colonizer's values, not ours. Since terms like protest and rebels are framed according to settler values or the colonizer's values, then how useful are they to indigenous people of decolonization and liberation? They're not useful to us. So these words of sovereignty, reconciliation, reparation, all these terminology of the colonizers, they're not useful to us. That's why they drag their feet year after year after year, and then they're gonna put a carrot out there, like in California, they're gonna put a carrot out there, or they're gonna get it all the, and they're gonna use that branding name, African Americans. They're gonna give all African Americans 250,000 Federal Reserve notes. That's not liberating anybody. That's not solving any problems. That's keeping the people attached to their nation state, to their state.
You in a state
Dependent.
depending on them, and then that brings in the subject of reparations to repair. So they feel that they can still control you by giving you a few hundred Federal Reserve notes or fake what they call money. That's not going to set you free. That's not going to set your mind free. Your mind brings everything to you, so that's why they want to control it.
Yes. And so what would you prefer? Would you prefer to get 250,000 measly Federal Reserve notes and still be dominated by these people?
That's a good example.
And or would you rather have your own land, get them out of here like they were supposed to be gone a long time ago? You grow your own food. I mean, we got the skills and everything. We don't need Federal Reserve notes if we can grow our own food, if we get our land back. We don't need them. We're not dependent on them. So we got to get that in our minds that we don't need them. For example, these talk about these words, this terminology. For example, reconciliation, whether applied to a truth and reconciliation commission or a land claims negotiation, may promise a renewed relationship with the state. We don't want no relationship with no state. We don't want a relationship with the fiction. We want our relationship with our own people on our own land. However, in practice, it has been used to further colonize indigenous nations and legitimize the presence of states and other shape-shifting colonial actors on indigenous homelands. It keeps them here. As long as we hold on to them, we're going to keep them here. So we got to stop doing that. Do whatever you need to do to decolonize your mind so we can end this thing. That's when you become liberated. Another example, economic development programs are used in a similar way as a state-based solution to indigenous poverty. Please, They're the reason why we got poverty. But it is an economic approach really strengthening and enriching indigenous communities, or are indigenous communities actually putting their energies into strengthening the dominant economic system. That's what they're doing. They're strengthening their economic system because they know if they give these people 250,000 Federal Reserve notes, they're going to put it right back into their system. It doesn't solve anything. In other words, who benefits and how? According to Alfred, quote, there is in fact not a shred of empirical evidence, empirical evidence that increasing the material wealth of indigenous people or increasing the economic development of First Nations or indigenous, Aboriginal indigenous communities in any way improves mental or physical health and overall well-being of people in our communities. Indigenous peoples can decode the true motivations behind these terms and find viable strategies to counteract the state's politics of distraction, because that's all these terms use. That's what they're used for, to distract us.
All of you out there have realized how everything is going up, how the prices of everything is going up. That is a plan. If they come and say, we're going to give you 250,000 Federal Reserve notes, all they're going to do is raise the prices
Oh yeah.
to get all that back. You see what we're saying? Is that it's not what they give you, really actually it's what they plan on doing to you when they do give it to you. They just raise the prices of things up and keep you in the same position where you are right
Within
now.
their system.
Yes.
Okay, now, state terminology designed to legitimize an occupation of indigenous nations. I'm going to read the terminology that they use, and then we're going to read what their motive is.
Okay.
State terminology means indigenous translation. State building means indigenous nation destroying. Political integration means invasion of indigenous territories. Economic development means land theft and plunder of indigenous homelands and resources via extraction industries. Ooh. Extraction industries. To extract means to take people out. So they got the jails, the prisons, they got these policy forces they call sheriffs, police, and all that to just kill our people dead in the street. They have to get us out of here in some form of fashion. That's the extraction industries. Gentrification, that's one of them. The jails and the prisons, that's one of them. The medical industry, that's one of them.
But I want to state this. The reason why we tell you these things so that you can be wise. So you can have some knowledge of knowing how it really is out there. So that you can be able to protect yourself, protect your family, and have some wisdom about how this world really actually works. But the decision is really actually yours. To receive truth, wisdom, and knowledge. So that you can protect yourself.
So, just a few more. We'll go over economic development again because that's a tricky. Because see, in their politics, they use that a lot. You know, economic development, the education. So, economic development means land theft and plunder of indigenous homelands and resources via extraction industries. You can figure that out for yourself. Reconciliation, that's another one. I heard some old man, he's supposed to be, he called himself a Native American, but he was half Albion colonizer, what they call white folks. And he gonna use the word reconciliation. Okay, reconciliation, using a state process to legitimize continuing colonial occupation of indigenous homelands. I can think of one main one, reparations.
Yes. Yes.
Protests. These are their terms now, and this is what it really means. Protest, protecting indigenous homelands. So when we protest, yes, we are protected, but to them, that's against them. So they're gonna fight against that. If you notice, that's what they do all the time. Assimilation. Oh my goodness. Assimilation is genocide. They're taking everything away from us. Our lives, our livelihood, our way of reproducing ourselves, because you got all this homosexuality and stuff like this. I mean, they condone bestiality. I mean, these colonizers, everything, they use everything to get rid of us. They put our men in these jails and prisons so that they can't reproduce. So they have men on top of men, and they put the women in these jails and prisons, women on top of, for what they call crimes is not really a crime. Separatists, a nation that never joined the state. So we never joined these states. We never recognized them, these nation states and these states. They're still colonies, and it's in our blood. We were, even though we are by blood, some of these tribes that they call part of the 5 or 6 civilized tribes, the ones that really assimilated, Christianized themselves and things like that. But not all of us went for that. I know that, otherwise I wouldn't be rebelling like I have been to this day. It's in my blood. We were part of those tribes and say, no, we're not going to go with that. We want our own ways. So the separatists, that's what they call us. A nation that never joined the state. We never did. I don't care what kind of, what do you call it, labels that they put on us, what kind of paperwork they have. It doesn't matter. Rebels, militants, and or terrorists, a group of armed indigenous people who pose a credible threat to the legitimacy of the state. They got arms. Our ancestors was never without arms to defend ourselves. You see these United States colonizers over in all these different lands, got the biggest military arsenal in the world, I've been told. But what do you call them? But yet, just people that's trying to live our own lives without being dominated, oppressed, just murdered in cold blood day in and day out for a few greedy niggas. National security is state military occupation of indigenous nations. Those are their terms. Okay. Our communities, even though, like we may work in small groups, because there's so many of us that are still colonized in our minds that you don't expect a big turnout. You're not gonna see droves of us. But indigenous people can decode the true motivations behind these terms and find viable strategies to counter the state's politics of distraction, because that's all these terms do. Even the reparations, that is one of the greatest ones, distraction tools. Distracting the people. Oh, they gonna get all these Federal Reserve notes. Ooh, what I'm gonna do? They gonna put it right back into the doggone system. But it's like they're thinking there's some sort of release. And as proof that is not, look at all these athletes and all these actors and actresses making all these Federal Reserve notes. They are no better off.
If I may.
Go ahead.
And for a lot of you all that doesn't have the knowledge of this, when we say Federal Reserve notes, that's what's written on that
paper.
That paper. Which means who controls that?
Yeah,
the Federal Reserve
System, yeah. And look whose pictures on that paper.
Yes.
All these Alban European white men. Their pictures are on the paper. It belongs to them. We didn't have that. We didn't need that. And we still don't need it.
So they're telling you exactly what it is. They're saying that you don't own it.
That's right. Okay. How can a colonial question? How can a colonial power be trusted to protect the rights of indigenous people to self-determination or to protect indigenous homelands for that matter? You can't trust them. I mean, you got these so-called politicians, Trump, Biden right now, even Obama, they're all a part of the same old game. They want to stay in occupation of this land. And in dominant over the people. And like in other videos, we pointed out, Asia got them niggas out of their land. Africa is getting them out of their land. Everybody's getting the colonizers out of their land. That's why they are so afraid of the word decolonization. But we don't do it by going through the United Nations. Like it says, and like we mentioned before, self-determination is taken. It's not a negotiation.
And it says
self-determination.
Self-determination
so
is taken.
That means that these nation state fictions, they can't define who you are. Otherwise, that's not even self-determination.
And changing the mindset will change the thing what's happening in your life. Changing the mind will change your surroundings or what's happening in your life. Not under control anymore.
Remember, according to international law, no actions by indigenous peoples can be seen as dismembering or impairing totally or in part the territorial integrity or political unity of sovereign and dependent states. That means you can't do nothing as indigenous people going to the state for them to help you, because you're just going to empower them more. You're going to empower these entities more by keep going to them and holding on to their documents and trying to self-define according to their definition instead of your own. Oh, it says, finally, where does a state's authority to grant these rights originate? States claim that human rights are gifts from their government to you. Get out of here. And yet the state can take these gifts away at any time.
Right, that's important. When you go out there and you vote,
yes, that's a good
for
one.
these, I'm gonna call them fake presidents who really actually govern these states. You're really actually putting yourself in a state of mind where they can govern what you do in their state. I'm explaining that. In other words, you are consenting for them to do whatever they want to you.
Yeah.
And you can do nothing but put up with it, which they don't do anything.
They just continue on what they're doing.
They just continue on what they do because they know what they have already written to keep you under control.
And just genocide period. They're gonna keep
Genocide
doing it.
period.
You know, they can't get us out of here. They can't get us off our own land, so they breed us out. And other things. They just outright kill us. It's gotta stop. And it stops by decolonizing this up here.
Okay.
Okay, states claim that the human rights are gifts from the government to you, and yet the state can take these gifts away at any time. Furthermore, as a colonial power, the state has no legitimate authority to even offer us these false gifts. Besides that, indigenous peoples do not need them. We already have inherent powers and responsibilities based on our relationships to our land, culture, and our communities. I hope you hear it.
Very important to have knowledge of that. So if you have heard of this so-called Trail of Tears, well, why would these people who come up with colonizing you, who want to capture your leaders of your tribes and your clan, and supposedly take you hundreds and hundreds of miles away to a certain area, which they're forts that they built, and supposedly be protecting you? No, they was doing you like cattle because they had a ransom on your head. They could cut you, cut off your ears, cut off your scalp, and sell it to their government, stating that they have killed one of the Aboriginal indigenous people.
That's their
or their chief.
Mhm.
So this so-called quote-unquote Trail of Tears was not for the so-called, I'm gonna call them Indians' safety. It was so that they could write down who they have killed, who they have murdered. So this Trail of Tears is really actually this trail that they've been leading you through all this time right now, and you don't know who you are. You have no knowledge of who you are. That's the trail you've been on. You're not Negro, Black, Colored, African American. All these trails are from Africa. And you were the Aboriginal Indigenous people all the time. You wonder, why didn't this connect with our grandparents and our mothers and our fathers were telling you, well, this is the way they would say that you had Indian blood in you. It's just that they had knowledge of that time. They were telling you that you are the Aboriginal Indigenous people in this land. Not Indian, but the first.
Right. And this trail, about the Trail of Tears, that was mainly from what I've been reading on the subject. For those individuals within those certain tribes that wanted to assimilate. And so those are the ones that moved to places like Oklahoma. The majority of us did not do that. How you think they're gonna fit all the populations all over North America in the state of Oklahoma?
They were killing them.
They were killing us off. But our people still refused, just like we're refusing today, to this day. It took us a while to figure this out, but it took us at the right time. So we all have to figure this out. We have to stop. We have to stop. We have to recognize that our minds have been colonized, and we gotta undo it.
What I have learned in the natural process of life from the knowledge and the time that I've been upon this earth is that it only takes one seed to produce very, very, very many others. So this seed of truth that is being put inside of you, may you reproduce, may you teach your children, your brother, your sister.
So this is what I say in closing. Then I won't have anything else to say on the subject. We had to do this like at the spur of the moment because our people, they're still stirring in the colonial soup pot. Stop trying to self-determine by creating more fiction, by creating more fictional states, more fictional nation states. We have to resurrect our own. Get back. Get it back. And all it takes is you just getting that out of your mind, the dependency on the people and their institutions that got us in this state in the first place.
And don't perish because of a lack of what you don't have the knowledge of. Become knowledgeable about self, family, and your life will change.
Yakoki, thank you for listening.
Yakoki. I love you,
Big.
and the whole world.
Now, I don't love the whole world now.
You got that out.
I love you, Mother Earth.